So hello, everybody. My name's Wendy Craig, and I'm the Scientific Director of PREVNet, which stands for Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence Network. On behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Before we start, I'd just like you to take a moment and think for a moment about wherever you are located. Join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous peoples. I know personally that I'm grateful to be able to take part and use the land in these days of particular challenge when we're isolated. So to go outside and be on my front lawn makes me celebrate and appreciate the nature and the beauty and how well our Indigenous people have taken care of it. So I'm grateful for that personally. And I would like you all just to take a moment and think and acknowledge and thank the generations of Indigenous people who've cared for our land. We're bringing today's webinar from the community of practice that we run to address teen dating violence. It's funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And today I'm absolutely delighted to partner with Dr. Faye Mishna from the University of Toronto for a webinar entitled Working with Vulnerable Youth Online, a Trauma-Informed Approach. Before I introduce Faye, I will go through our webinar format for today. Faye is going to present for about 55 minutes, and during her presentation, we invite you to type any comments or questions that you may have for her in the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We will track those questions and then pull from them and present them to Faye at the end of her presentation during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. We have posted a link to Faye's webinar slides in English, and you can find that link in the chat box. So you may like to print a copy to follow along and make notes. At the end of the webinar, in the chat box, you will see a link to the evaluation, and that's the evaluation of this webinar. As an evidence-based organization, we really value people's responses about our presentations, and they help guide us when we're planning for future webinars. So all of your feedback is anonymous, and we highly value it. So please take the 2 minutes at the end to complete that. Once you have completed the evaluation form, you'll be directed to a website where you'll be prompted to enter your full name and email address. And once you've done that, a certificate of attendance will be generated and emailed to you. And I just want to stress that even though you fill in that part with your name in order to get the certificate of attendance, your name isn't associated or attached to the evaluation form at all. So the evaluations are completely anonymous in terms of your feedback. I also want to note that the webinar today is being recorded. So after the webinar, we will send out a link to everyone that's registered so they could share the recording or listen to it if they weren't able to join us today. And now, why you're really here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Faye Mishna. I won't tell you how long I've known Faye because that will just age us. Let's just say that we're really young looking 29-year-olds and I've known her for a very long time. Faye Mishna joined the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto in 1999 as an assistant professor. Faye has served as the Dean of the Faculty from 2009 to 2019 and is currently a professor in the faculty. She's also cross-appointed to the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. She holds the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Chair in Child and Family. Her program of research focuses on bullying, cyberbullying, and sexting among youth, informal cyber technology used in social work practice and clinical practice. She also has a small private practice in psychotherapy and consultation. Faye is one of those rare scientists who brings science to practice and practice to science. So what you're going to learn today is evidence-based information that's going to guide you in moving forward. It's going to be applied, but it's going to be grounded in what we know in science. And that's the strength and what I really appreciate in the way that Faye has worked and does her work in both research and practice. So enough of my talking, and I'm delighted to have you with us, Faye, today. And now I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Wendy. So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. This talk, in this time, which is so unusual for all of us. That includes working with youth who are vulnerable, because now we have to work with them totally online. So just to say, I'd be very curious for your feedback and comments, because it's really, right now, everything is kind of unknown. But as Wendy said, there is some evidence. There's evidence on working with youth and trauma-informed approaches. So I think we'll just go with it. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so we're talking about working with vulnerable youth online, a trauma-informed approach. So a bit of the context. When we talk about teen dating violence, 1 in 5 Canadian teens report being victimized by physical dating violence. So that's a very high number. 1/3 of Canadian teens report emotional and psychological violence, and between 10 and 30% report being victimized by cyber dating violence. So this is definitely a problem. This is pre-COVID. 55, over half of Canadian victims of sexual assault are under the age of 18, and more than 80% of these are female. And 1/3 of Canadian teenagers and young women between the ages of 15 to 24 have said they've experienced online sexual harassment in the past 12 months. So we're going into COVID with this. So now that we're in COVID, we have a little bit of evidence, a little bit of research, and very unhappy and scary news. 9 women and girls across Canada have been killed in domestic homicides in 1 month pandemic. 12% of teenagers and young women between the ages of 15 and 24 say that they are very or extremely anxious about the possibility of violence at home during this time. And almost a quarter of the 112% increase of calls to Kids Help Phone are related to physical violence in the home. So staying at home is not necessarily safe at all. So a bit about increased violence at home. So one of the things we need to do in working with youth now is we need to be aware that the home environment may not be a safe space. It doesn't mean it is, it doesn't mean it isn't, but we need to be aware that it might not be, and that the youth might not tell us. And as we know, COVID-19 has led to increased confinement, and that means, for many youth, increased confinement with perpetrators, also having economic precarity in their home, and reduced access to protection services. And so therefore, gender-based violence and sexual exploitation and abuse are expected to further increase. And then youth who live in what we call socially toxic environments that are characterized by systemic barriers such as community violence, discrimination, and poverty may experience symptoms of trauma. So it would be, for example, some emotional distress and feelings of helplessness. And these are likely further exacerbated by the current health pandemic. And one thing I'll keep stressing is the youth may or may not connect it to those experiences. So it's important for us as service providers to be mindful of that. And then the potential increase in online teen dating violence. We already know that's an issue, but this sudden switch to digital technologies for all connectivity increases teenagers' vulnerability to cyber-based violence. And it really creates opportunities for cyber abuse, whereby abusive partners can control, stalk, or discredit their partners through text, social media, or mobile apps, with very few supports available for the youth. There's also a potential increase in online sexual pressure. And again, we often talk about online sexual pressure, but we need to also remember female adolescents who experience offline sexual coercion and dating violence are more likely to report online sexual coercion, sexting under pressure. And that's really important because often we talk about them as quite separate, and they really are not. Research is showing that there is definitely an overlap. So what is offline sexual coercion? It's pressuring a dating partner to have sex without a condom, insisting on sex when the partner did not want to, or using threats to pressure them into having sex. And one of the questions that they responded yes to is, did you ever give into sex play, fondly kissing or petting but not intercourse? Or did you ever give into sexual intercourse when you didn't want to because you were overwhelmed by a man's continual argument or pressure? So we already know throughout the world, female adolescents are often repeatedly asked, pressured, or coerced to send self-made sexually explicit pictures. And these are female adolescents and pre-adolescents as well. So given the likely decline of in-person sexual coercion and harassment outside of the home because of the lack of contact due to the social distancing measures, we can presume that online sexual pressure will take its place. And so that means it's not just new, it's on top of what the pressure already is, that it should escalate. And unfortunately, one of the features of online sexual images that once they're sent, they can be used to blackmail and further harass teenagers. And we know they can be shared without consent very, very broadly. There's also the potential increase for online sexual harassment. And again, offline sexual objectification and physical harassment is tied to technologically mediated harassment. So again, there's a connection, they're not separate. And therefore, female adolescents who experience offline sexual coercion are more likely to have received a naked picture sent by somebody, a male, without permission compared to their counterparts. And online sexual harassment can involve unsolicited sexual images. So that would be, for example, dick pics. And that's where young men send unsolicited sexual comments and threats of physical abuse alongside sending unsolicited photos. And in a study that we're currently doing and studies that others have done, and we're doing this at University College London, where we're interviewing, doing focus groups of youth between the ages of 12 and 19. Almost all of them, including the 12-year-olds, have received these dick pics unsolicited, and they can receive them just email, they can be in the subway and have it airdropped on, and importantly, they do not talk to adults about it. And COVID-19 has already sparked an increase in online sexual predators, and therefore could lead, and likely will lead, maybe has already led to increased sexual harassment of young people online. So in general, there's a concern about increased mental health concerns, and 50% of the almost 2,000 Canadians surveyed reported that their mental health has worsened since the pandemic. And the mental health and well-being of adolescents are particularly vulnerable to the effects of COVID because of their developmental stage. So we know adolescence is a sensitive period for social interaction. That's when they really have an enhanced need for peer acceptance, peer influence, finding out who they are in the context of their peers. And widespread changes in social environments, such as enforced social distancing, increased social deprivation and isolation, might significantly impact their brain, which is still growing, and the behavioral development. And feeling insufficiently connected to others has been linked to profound and lasting negative consequences on physical and mental health, including increased mortality. And that's something we know, that connection, relationship, attachment is critical throughout the lifespan, but there are times that are particularly critical in adolescence time going over. So because of the conditions of COVID, we need to be aware that adolescents may experience increased exposure to traumatic events linked to dating violence or domestic violence in their home. And again, what's important is we need to be aware of it, and the youth, can't expect the youth to let us know. And the other thing we need to be aware of is the response to traumatic events are wide-ranging, and they include, and it can be one or more of these and many others: isolation, hypervigilance, drinking or using other drugs to cope, self-injury, eating disorders, depression, anxiety, among others. And again, importantly, the youth may not link this to their way of coping. And often adults don't, and one of the important things about a trauma-informed approach, which I'll talk about, is that it doesn't just say, why are you doing this? You have a problem. It's trying to understand what this is trying to do for them. Like, how is it their way of coping, and what is it related to? Which takes the focus off of them and more on what has happened and what is happening. So again, in COVID, one of the biggest issues is decreased access to social supports and services. So it really enhances the challenges faced by adolescents who are exposed to or experiencing or witnessing violence, because it really disrupts the social supports and services that can help reduce violence. And we know that not everybody has equal supports in the first place, but whatever supports somebody has, they're disrupted. And as few as 8% of youth who experience dating violence reach out to parents, teachers, healthcare practitioners, or other adults who can help. And this really has been found for all bullying, sexual abuse, for all kinds of adversity that youth experience. And it's one of the most troubling issues. And we often say to youth, tell an adult, but they don't. And they don't not tell just for no reason. They have reasons, and it's important to know what those are and to try to address those. But in the meantime, it's important to know that they don't. And so this lack of access to supports beyond one's parents will likely further decrease the reporting. So the learning objectives. So given the context of COVID-19, it's important to understand how trauma-informed services can be made accessible and online to vulnerable youth. And using a trauma-informed approach, the aim of this webinar is to inform service providers about ways and the importance of and ways to assess for barriers to access and to ensure that online services for youth are safe and confidential. And that's easier said than done. And that's where things like the connection comes in, having a connection with the youth. So what is trauma-informed care? It's informed by and responsive to the impact of any distressing experience and its presenting issues among highly vulnerable individuals. And trauma-informed services incorporate an awareness of the prevalence of trauma and its impact on the lives of clients into all aspects of service provision. So what that really means is if somebody who's coming with a trauma-informed approach doesn't just look at this individual and say, what is your problem? It's looking and understanding that trauma is very prevalent and it affects people in different ways, even if they're not aware of it. So the question is not focused on what is the problem with the individual, but more on what has happened, or what experiences have happened that might be influencing their behavior or their feelings right now. And again, I can't stress enough, the youth themselves might not be aware of it. They might just say, oh, it has nothing to do with anything. It's just how I am, I'm this, I'm that. And it's trauma-informed care, trauma-informed approach does not look at it that way. It really does look at the context. So defining trauma. Trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically and or emotional, harmful, overwhelming, or life-threatening. And trauma can be defined by what's known as the 3 E's: the event, the actual event, and then the experience. And that's important because 5 people can go through the same event and they'll have different experiences, and each one is legitimate for that person, is based on many things. And then the effect on the individual well-being and behavior, because again, we know it's not necessarily the same. So we need to look at all 3. And psychological trauma refers to any critical incident which includes repeated verbal and emotional abuse and neglect that, 1, causes people to experience unusually strong emotional reactions where they can feel dysregulated, can produce physiological changes like a rapid pulse, heartbeat, sweating, and that it can affect their ability to function at work, at home, and in other areas of their lives. So a trauma-informed approach, importantly, is not just for persons with a history of trauma. It really is an accessible, humane, holistic approach to care. And the focus is the ardent belief in each person's capacity to make the necessary changes in their lives with, in the right circumstances. And organizational cultures and service providers need to be highly sensitive to the physical, emotional, social, and environmental triggers related to an individual's distress. And what they do, and a really important way, is they partner with the individuals to explore and understand and diffuse these issues in a way that prevents re-traumatization in that situation with the worker. So that's really important. They need to be sensitive to that and then partner with them to deal with it. And importantly, you need to be aware of the relational context in which trauma occurs, and so how trauma occurs, and also how the person's responded to by others, and if they tell somebody. Both of those are really important. The relational context is key, and it's regardless of the framework. There are many frameworks, but regardless of the framework, and that cannot be minimized. The relational context is free. And actually, we know that in therapy, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that shows that the therapeutic relationship, the therapeutic association alliance, according to the client, not according to the therapist, but according to the client, has the most effect on the outcome. So with youth, it's critical that adults listen to and validate a child's and youth's experience of the trauma or the victimization. Again, we're talking about their experience. So it's not a time to check out the facts and see just what they're saying, is that fit, are they right, overreacting, underreacting. It's really not. It's important that that can come later once there's a connection and the youth may feel safe. But and now it's just validate their experience, because their experience is real. It's their reality. And not doing that, I can't stress that enough, because that can lead to the youth further feeling traumatized. Sorry, there's sirens around. So on top of the original trauma, they now have further traumatization because they're not being believed. It can also lead to doubting their own feelings, their own views, and ultimately to stop telling adults about traumatic experiences. And that's very problematic, because we know, well, they already don't much. And I've already said this, but we need to recognize that youth are reluctant to volunteer information about their traumatic experiences. And it's not that they're withholding, it's just for many reasons it's very difficult. And it's really the service provider's responsibility. It's our responsibility to empathically encourage them to talk at their pace. So there's an emphasis on telling one's story, or helping somebody even understand their story in a coherent way, because one of the issues that comes with trauma or feeling victimized is feeling overwhelmed, feeling dysregulated, not being able to be coherent. So helping them tell their coherent story in their context at their own pace, and in an environment that promotes respect and physical and psychological safety. And it's important to stress that it promotes that, and we need to know that when we first meet with the youth, they're not going to feel safe. It's our job to make them feel safe. Just that they're with us doesn't make them feel safe. And importantly, an adult or a service provider's interest and their empathic understanding can help strengthen a youth's sense of self. It can increase their self-esteem, and it can help them identify their feelings. And this is really important, because that alone can really make a difference as they're coping. And at this time of COVID, if you're working with somebody on Zoom or by phone, and if you're limited in what you can do because they're not necessarily safe, the fact that they experience that, research shows that makes a big difference. So implementing a trauma-informed approach requires fidelity to a set of core principles, not to a rigidly prescribed set of practices. And it's one where everybody recognizes and responds to the impact of traumatic stress on those who have contact with the system. That's important too, because recognizing that coming into the system can be traumatic. Programs and agencies infuse and sustain trauma awareness, knowledge, and skills into all aspects of their organizational cultures, practices, and policies. And importantly, they partner or act in collaboration with all those involved with the child, drawing on the best available science to support recovery and resilience of children and families. And again, it's really important that it's all aspects, and it's one of the reasons, and many agencies are really working to become more and more trauma informed, but it's one of the reasons it's difficult too, because it really does include huge commitment to deal with all aspects. But again, the important thing is they act in collaboration, they partner. So the three principles that need to be followed are trauma awareness, safety and trustworthiness, and connections. I've mentioned them all. Trauma awareness in practice, so that would include things like identifying the trauma-related needs of children and families, such as the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And what that is really, it's conventionally identified as psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect or abandonment, death of a parent, violence against parent, mother, parental separation or divorce, or living with caregivers who misuse substances, experience mental illness or suicidal behavior, or were ever in prison. Now, these are adverse childhood experiences. How they affect somebody will differ. And one of the things that has been found is it's not just whether there's been one, it's the accumulation that is really impactful. It's accumulation that's very concerning. More recently, there's been a call to expand, and really to expand this conventional definition, because it excludes, it doesn't have, and there's this recognition now that diversity also occurs at school, in the community, and can be related to systemic inequalities such as poverty or racism. So it really recognizes that the youth who's living in a community that doesn't feel safe or is experiencing racism, they're coming to school, that's traumatic, that affects them. And according to the conventional ACEs, that wouldn't have been included in that way, so that would have been missed. So that's a very important addition. And I think it's always important, but it's very relevant now in COVID because we see all of that happening. So now in COVID, we need to be mindful of youth's possible increased vulnerability. And we really need to therefore be aware of their experiences of expanded ACEs directly and indirectly. So for example, we're living in a world where, you know, the home situation, the community might not be safe and they're stuck, they're more less able to leave. They might be in a home that isn't safe, that there's economic, parents might have lost their jobs, they don't have food. So it could just be all of these other kinds of situations, experiencing more racism, more gender violence, all of these experiences that would work on top of what they're coming into. So, so when we work with the youth, let's say somebody who's experiencing teen violence, dating violence, we need to recognize, and again, we don't need to necessarily probe for it, it depends on the circumstance and how you're working, but we need to recognize that youth may have previously experienced trauma. And that's just important because when there's different symptoms or behaviors that are coming out, we need to think that we don't know the context. We need to be aware that there might be a context that's bringing them out. And we also need to understand that there are various ways of coping with trauma, including ones that look maladaptive. And it's, again, a trauma-informed approach, one of the principles is that regardless of how, quote, maladaptive it looks, this is the person's best attempt at coping with a traumatic situation. And so we really want to focus on developing safe and supportive relationships and environments, but also recognizing that because of the trauma, the child, the youth might have trouble doing that. So we don't want to get into just giving advice, just focusing on doing it in a partnered way. And importantly, we need to apply a cultural lens because understanding trauma and approaches to healing must be informed by cultural contexts and not by our own in order for it to be effective. And then safety and trustworthy in practice. Trustworthiness in practice, what does that look like? So it's really trying to maximize the physical and psychological safety of youth because that is necessary. Recognizing it's absolutely necessary for social and emotional well-being and promoting long-term positive outcomes. If somebody is not feeling safe, they cannot be okay. And if we're not aware of that, we will be missing it. And in COVID-19, due to the challenges to the youth's sense of physical safety or psychological safety, we really need to explore new strategies to enhance their safety through online services and at least help them recognize that they might not be safe and just to help them take care of themselves. And then connection. People grow through connection. Connection, attachment is critical. And as I mentioned before, it's the active ingredient in all healing relationships. And so now we need to find new ways to connect with the youth. And again, that's up to us. That's our responsibility. So assessing and resolving barriers to youth accessing online services. And so we need to recognize there are many barriers that prevent youth from accessing them. And in order to promote trauma awareness, we need to assess these new barriers within the context of the new trauma-related needs of clients, youth in this time of COVID. So first barrier, as I mentioned, is privacy concerns. Due to the sudden switch to online communication, actually people everywhere may be experiencing new barriers to accessing online services. But youth who experience dating or sexual violence and its possible new online formats, as well as youth who are coping with past traumatic events, they face specific challenges when accessing online services, so we need to be aware of that. Youth may find it very difficult to identify places where they can participate in online intervention or support privately without a family member hearing or observing them. And they might not have a room of their own. There might actually literally be no place where they can be on their own. So, and that increased lack of privacy might prevent them from seeking support because they know they can't. Because of a strong fear of youth anyways before COVID was that families or parents would find out about their problems, whether it's dating violence, sexual images, that their big concern would be they did not want their parents to find out. And then, of course, if they're in an unsafe home, the lack of privacy may put them in greater danger during remote sessions. So even though their presenting issue might be dating violence, now that they're home, they might also be dealing with an unsafe home that they can't get away from to even come for the meeting. So an abusive partner or parent or family member might monitor a youth's online activities. We need to be aware of that, like emails, instant messaging, and they might find out that they're participating in this online support. But often when we talk about using online ways of technology, we talk about the importance of being HIPAA compliant and being secure. And that is all very important and critical, but we also need to realize that the youth, on their part, their phone, their email, their monitor may not be secure because somebody might be looking at it. So it's more complicated. And abusive partners or parent or family members, they might have access to their online accounts and they may impersonate the youth in communicating them. And so again, that could worsen their experiences that they're already dealing with, or again, prevent them from accessing the remote services in the first place. So recommendations for privacy. So really the first thing is prepare. Before initiating it, ask them about their privacy estate. And it's important to do so in a way that doesn't make them feel shamed and humiliated, because remember, it's important to remember that they're already feeling vulnerable. So say that, lots of people, now that we're in this situation, we need to have online technology for services. Lots of people don't have it in their homes. They might not have the privacy. And then you go in, does the room have a door? Can they be alone in the room? So again, making it so it doesn't just stand up for them. And then, if possible, support them in identifying safe places where family members cannot hear or observe them. And if a completely private space is not available, which it might not be, consider alternate media formats, for example, email, messaging, but again, recognizing that those also might not be completely safe. But one example, like we're on Zoom now, so let's say in a Zoom session, if the youth wants to discuss something more private, they can use the chat, and they can, the chats, so they can combine the video and the messaging, and that way they can feel some privacy. Before initiating it, again, ask them whether others have access to their phones, computers, or other devices. So just ask them to think about that and encourage them to have access to a safe and secure email account if they can. If they can't, we need to find other ways. And there's even been suggestions of considering whether there needs to be a process, like some kind of code or something, to verify the youth's identity, because we need to recognize that somebody might be impersonating them. And also provide use of resources about safe internet use. So for example, opening a website in incognito mode and deleting the browser history afterwards. Now this is information that most youth know, because I know in our studies with youth, they were talking about that's how they would check the, their, get onto the internet without the parents knowing. But it's really important to provide this to the youth in a way that is safe. So it could be on a Zoom or a phone call, so that they can have that at their service. And when you talk about a trauma-informed approach, it's strength-based in the sense it's giving them information that they can use. And it's presenting it in a way that's not just about them. So what let's see. Okay, so now on to the next barrier, which is connectivity issues. We often talk about how, people often say COVID has made everybody equal, and the internet has democratized everybody, but we know that that's not the case. In fact, we know that one of the issues that's come up now with everybody having to go online is that many youth and families don't have access. So what would they need? They need a computer, a tablet, or a smartphone, headphones, and a reliable internet connection. So all that's, cannot take for granted. And again, as there's more economic precarity because of COVID, youth may even have more limited access to these resources. And in addition to that, separately, technological malfunction, the loss of internet connection, which may not be strong in the first place, may interrupt or terminate a session, and we don't know at what point that would happen. So some recommendations. So the first one is allow them, rather than saying, let's do this, allow them to identify how they want to connect. Is it text, video, telephone? And also have them give you the name of the contact person who they trust to pass on a message if you can't reach them. And this is strength-based because it actually provides you with the personal control in the process. And that's really critical generally for youth, but at this time in COVID where they might feel even more hopeless and less powerful, it gives them a sense of personal control. And it's an essential component of the trauma-informed approach. Now, some organizations that have funding provide equipment if possible. So that's, again, you know, it's just an option. Many, if not most, are not able to do that. But if they can, that's an option. So when that happens, they usually have, they can track the document, they can check in, out. They also, some organizations provide an iPad, and it's locked down, so the only way they can access it is just for contact with the service provider. Or there's a link to a telehealth webinar which talks about equipment loaning procedures. And importantly, again, there's a lot of stuff to prepare ahead of time, but it doesn't have to take that long, but it's really critical, is make a proactive plan with the youth to address how service will be provided if there's a technological failure. And again, it could include the verification process that the youth is the youth. So very importantly, ensuring that online services for youth are safe and confidential. As mentioned, and we can't stress enough about safety and trustworthiness and connection, that they are critical components in a trauma-informed approach. And we need to account for these needs when switching to online service delivery, because if we're in a room or in a building that we know is safe, that we have control, we just don't have to think about these kinds of things. So now we really have to be aware that we must. So an emphasis on physical safety. So this is important because trauma survivors often feel unsafe and actually may currently be in unsafe living relationships or situations. And I think one of the common things, for example, is trauma survivors might need to they always have to look at the door. They can never face away from the door because they have to know who's coming in. They feel like they don't feel safe not knowing. So those are the kinds of things. And so physical, emotional, and we can't forget cultural safety for youth is a key to a trauma-informed approach. And we also need to know that youth may endure thoughts of harm or another crisis situation may emerge, and if that's the case, additional help is consequently required. So we need to be aware of that. And again, particularly in a situation where we're not in the room with somebody, if we're seeing somebody and then we feel that they're in crisis, they're there while we can make plans. But if they're in a home where we don't know where they are and we don't have access, that's a much more difficult situation. And youth with trauma histories tend to overestimate the risk to their psychological safety. And again, it's important to remember that they're at risk of being triggered. And they might be triggered by something we're not even aware of, so they might consequently go offline or cut off access to the service provider in the middle of a session. It's important to be aware that that can happen. And as a worker, you have reactions. I know I've had that happen to me. And it's kind of like shocking. And then, especially when I was younger and new in the field, it's very important. I really need help to know how to deal with that. So I think that's really critical to be aware that that can happen. So to enhance safety online, we have to prepare for that. So create a crisis plan. And this also is important because in doing that, it's another opportunity because we need to discuss, and I'll get to that later, with the youth, the limits of confidentiality, including a potential duty to warn or protect. If we think that they're at risk of somebody hurting them, or if they're being hurt by somebody, being abused, or if we think they're at risk of hurting themselves or somebody else. And it's really critical to have a crisis plan with the youth in case of an emergency. So you both have planned that out, and again, that they're part of that, so that if something happens and there is an emergency or they're disconnected, we already have a plan. And it's important to define emergency, and really that the online sessions aren't intended to manage the emergency, and then so that the youth knows what we're going to do, how you're going to respond should an emergency arise. And again, that's really important because that gives them a sense of control that they've been part of it. And if it happens, and even if they're very upset by it, but you've really gone through it thoroughly together, it's easier to keep that connection while, and then they getting back to the point where they can remember and feel, okay, that as hard as it is, they were part of that plan. If there's no plan and the worker just does it, that's a really vulnerable spot and way to break a connection because the youth just feels like, oh, it just happened to me again. And then make sure you have the information on the person, for the person who you've consented to have contact in the event of an emergency, and make sure that information is accessible. So all of that has to be ahead of time. And even if we're not expecting an emergency, because of the circumstances of COVID, I think we need to be prepared for it. And then also sharing safety resources for youth, because again, a trauma-informed approach encourages helping the youth enhance their own personal safety and future growth. So giving them training and education with respect to personal safety skills, healthy sexuality, interpersonal relationships, and using those skills. And that's really important too, because some of these topics are topics that typically, so I think about healthy sexuality, or I think about sexting, because that's my area of research, that often what youth hear about it, don't do it, just don't do it, particularly girls. So that's not particularly helpful, because they're just going to tune that out if they're going to do it anyways, and they just feel bad about it. So it's how do you help the conversation help them learn about stuff, so they don't feel like they have to just be doing it on their own and feel bad about themselves, do not speak to adults. So this is where we can use screen sharing, and we can use that option to share PowerPoints and Word documents with activities built in to cover various safety topics. So that's kind of a good way to do that too, together. And it's also important because that's a way of interacting and being in the session together. And you can also use screen sharing to watch videos of safety topics and then discuss that. So I've got a list of PowerPoint documents, Word PDF documents, and then more resources, as well as YouTube videos. And so there's a lot of resources, and I think it's really helpful to use it both for ourselves, but also with youth, so that they can then, again, it helps them feel a couple of things, helps them build a sense of control, personal control, and it also reminds them they're not alone. One of the hardest parts about this, and I think for any age, but youth in particular, that they think they're the only one. It's the only one with this problem. It's only them. So it's very helpful for them to find out, no, that that's not the case. So getting creative. Art can be a useful tool, and it's also a good way to combine. Sometimes it's really hard for kids to talk. And so especially traumatic memories or traumatic issues like admitting something, you know, talking to you about how somebody, teen violence, dating violence might be hard to talk about it. I'll give an example of that in a minute in one of our focus groups. So, and again, with things like Zoom, it's possible to do that. There's, so here's the, in the focus groups that we did, we did it with the University College London, Dr. Jessica Ringrose, and we did focus groups with teenagers between 12 and 19 in England and here. And at the end of the focus groups, we asked them if they wanted to draw something. We gave them kind of templates for Instagram. So this first one, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a boy masturbating. And that's a picture that she got sent. And what she said afterwards, this is my own writing after that, is that she hadn't talked about it that explicitly in the focus group. And it was easier for her to draw it. But then she said she felt very uncomfortable drawing it explicitly because she ends up feeling so bad and ashamed of even saying it or showing it. So it was easier for her to draw that and then to talk about why it was so hard to talk about it. Because again, we need to remember that just getting that picture sent in an unsolicited way has a huge impact. And this girl was 13. And then the other one is, hey babe, what's up? Hi Lou. By the way, can you send news? Sure, just delete them after. Sure, thanks, babe. So now in this one, it's this girl or boy, I don't even know who it was, I don't have that right here, but it didn't seem to have to be coerced. We know they often have to be, but even let's say they didn't have to be, can delete them after, sure, but we know often they don't. So these are, again, just, I don't want to get into the topic is about sexting, but really that the images and the ability to write, and again, it provides privacy because nobody can hear it and it's on the Zoom, and so that's just an option. And again, it's just an option. Like we don't want to, again, it's really important for the youth to feel like they're in control. And so consider new ways that they can express themselves online. And again, there's a lot. And you can encourage them to keep pencils, crayons, and other tools on hand. But And then there's free digital art making programs. And again, there's many resources. And there has to be an emphasis on trustworthiness. And so people who've experienced trauma often report having difficulties trusting others and their intentions. And what's really important to remember is that that's for good reason. That's actually good reality testing because they have reason not to. And discussing current, it says here past, but also current, especially if you're a youth, telling somebody about trauma is particularly challenging due to this sensitive nature. Like it's just so, and just as that girl said, even saying it, and that's one of the things that trauma approach, informed approach recognizes, that even talking about it, even saying it, brings up the feelings as though it's the case. So there's not a distance, it's so painful. And it can compromise, knowing that technology can compromise their confidentiality, privacy. So we can't promise it in the same way we could, like in the office, we can promise it because within the limits of confidentiality, but now we have another limit. So recommendations, so be transparent. Again, the worst is for youth to feel betrayed. So right at the beginning, tell them about the limits of confidentiality, and can't stress enough that just saying it, reading it isn't enough. They need to, because they'll hear it, but what we mean a lot, they need to know enough so that they know if they tell you something that's about abuse or something that you have heard that they have heard what the limits are. And written consent forms might be helpful if they outline the limits and risks. And again, I think it varies, but they really need to be reassured that there's sessions that you're not recording them, you're not posting them, and you're not sharing it with their caregivers unless it meets the limits to confidentiality. So that has to be really crystal clear, because if they feel betrayed, so for example, if you haven't been clear about that, or that they don't really know, if they tell you something and you have to call, say yes, or you do something, or they're talk to the parents, they can really feel betrayed and lose the connection. But as I said before, if you've really talked about that with them and they understand that, then it's accurate to say, okay, you're doing this to help them. It's in their best interest. And that's why you wanted them to know about it. And then it's possible to work through that connection to keep that. I know I've experienced that, but that's critical that they not feel betrayed. And also the trustworthiness, you're saying something to them that's hard for them to hear. They might not want to hear that, but that they can trust you, that you're telling them, that you're not going to just say something and do something different. And really I'm talking about emphasis on the connections. Trauma undermines the youth's ability to form positive relationships. And we know that that's a critical component of all development. And female adolescents may be vulnerable, and I say in quotes, choosing relationships or ending up in relationships that foster and maintain their self-concept as a victim, because if they've been abused, if they're vulnerable, they might feel like they deserve it. They might doubt their own feelings because they've been betrayed, and even if they pick up something that doesn't feel okay, they might disregard it or not know how to recognize it as a point. So we need to understand that. And so safety depends on development of comfortable and positive connections between traumatized youth and the adults in their lives. That's critical. And I think it's critical to remember that it's the development of them. They don't come just because they are. So just because we're an adult who wants to help them does not make them feel they can trust us. And we need to be clear about that. So how to enhance connections? Be as consistent and as predictable as possible. And so really provide clear information, prepare them for online meetings ahead of time, as I've said, that really helps. And also not just prepare them, but again, as I said before, ask them what works for them. So be partnered with them and be consistent. And when you're not, when we do make a mistake or we do something that's upsetting for them, even if they don't say it, we can say, hey, you know what, I think what I did was not okay, because that's also important for repairing the connection and also role modeling that other people can do that. So enhancing connection, be supportive and empathic. And so it means reach out and engage them if they miss the appointment. Let's say you're supposed to have a Zoom and they don't show up. And often we say, oh, teenagers often don't show up, so it can be easy to think, oh, well, that's just them being a teenager. Might be, but it also might not be. And it doesn't hurt, just in fact, it helps to reach out and just check in, but not in a way that's punitive or shaming, just checking in, like welcoming them. Also, check in afterwards when a session content might cause distress for the youth, and also incorporate a debrief at the end of each session. That's a helpful thing to do, because again, the youth themselves might not be aware of it. And developing those kinds of relationships can, it means being non-judgmental, reliable, supportive, and tailoring interventions to meet them. And recognizing they may not know what they're feeling. They may feel shame, they may blame themselves, they may feel they deserve the treatment. And again, it's important just saying to them, oh no, you don't. You can't, it's not just a cognitive issue. So you say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, you're not to blame. That's another reason they can feel bad, because they're like, oh, so I don't even think properly. So it can be pretty complex. And understand that they find it very difficult to talk to adults. So connection is the correction. Jane Middleton-Moss, who's at the faculty, uses that. Connection is the correction. I think that's really important. Critical to listen empathically, follow their pace, and help them open up without being invasive. And that can help them become more accepting. And it really mirrors the evidence on resilience, which points to the importance of positive connections with caring adults. And with kids, for example, who have learning disabilities and have problems at school, they have one champion. Research shows that having one adult champion helps make a difference. And I think I'm on time. Thank you. So let's stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Faye. That was an amazing presentation that really grounded us in what a trauma-informed perspective is and how to live in it online. So that was just a fabulous talk, and we really appreciate your insights and the groundedness of it.
Thank you.
While you were talking, you generated a few questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that came up through the chat while you were presenting. So the first question, I think, came up when you were presenting the prevalence rates, and it was, what would the typical homicide rate of women and girls outside of the COVID times be?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer, but I know it's significant. That's something I will find out, but I don't know the answer, but I can find that out. But I know that femicide is a big problem outside of COVID. And I think that one of the things that COVID has done has brought it to the fore again in a different kind of way, where people are becoming, it's being reported in the news, but in a way that we're becoming aware of it. But I can check that out, but I know it's problematic.
Okay. And when you were presenting the demographic or the statistics, did they include isolated First Nation communities, or was that just in general? Were they nationally?
I think it was in general, but I think that's a really important question, really important. Because we know that isolated Indigenous communities have, when we talk about those expanded ACEs, they live in, they deal with racism, many forms that make them vulnerable. And so I think that that needs to be brought in, and probably is not enough. And it's
and I'm going to be switching around. You can tell, like, as the talk came. So the next question had to do with, what about, do you have recommendations for privacy for younger kids or kids that are experiencing conflict with their siblings?
Well, it's interesting. Again, when you say younger, like if they're 12 and older, they really can consent on their own to doing that. So I would say you would do the same, the same kinds of issues where you could talk on the phone or Zoom. If they're younger than 12, it gets a bit more complicated because you might need the parental consent. But I think if possible, I mean, kids as young as 3 years old can be seen and get help therapeutically through play. So I think there's no reason you cannot do that in the same way through Zoom. And again, there's that whiteboard where both of you can draw on. There's different kinds of games that can be available through the screen sharing. So I think that'd be really critical.
Okay.
I don't think anything's been done on that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for that.
Okay. Can you provide some suggestions and this for how to verify the youth online is who they say they are?
Well, you know, I mean, one way might be to have like a special code, you know, like between the two of you, like a word that only you two would know. So that, and I'm not sure of other ways, but I'm sure those resources have a lot of them. But I would say that's the thing that comes to my mind is like, what's the word? You know, it's like if I send a, if I interact with a bank to somebody, you often have a code word, right? So just do something very simple. And so just say that, you know, if you're going to get online, what's this? That's something that only the two of you would know, that somebody else could not figure out.
That's just like you would have a safe word between parents and their children often. It's the same idea.
Exactly, the same idea. It's their word. So it'd be your word. And if somebody, but it's got to be a word that is not easily, somebody can't figure out.
So another question has to do is, has the COVID-19 impacted the male youth as much as the female youth? And tips for ensuring safety and privacy when, oh, sorry, I will go with that one first.
Well, you know, again, I haven't read anything on that, but that's a really important question. And I imagine it has. I mean, one of the things that we know about male youth is that they're often directed to pornography sites, and including younger males. And then when they get there, they often feel, they might feel very concerned, feel like they're going to be arrested, but they get kind of hooked on it. So more of that might be happening, and they might have less support. If they're gaming, a lot of homophobia, racism, all kinds of stuff happens online in those gaming situations. And even though there's a message that there's monitoring, there's often not monitoring. And the other thing I don't know, which I would like to find out, we'd like to do after our when we can continue the focus groups, hopefully, is find out if they ended up pressuring girls more, if they ended up sending pictures more, unsolicited pictures. So I think that it's really important during COVID to find out what is happening, because it's likely that they're all affected, but we just need to really find out how and not assume that we know.
There's sort of two questions that are sort of following up from what you've just said, and they're really focusing on, you know, that there are many barriers to the access of technology and safe spaces to support connection during and to help the vulnerable youth. And those vulnerable youth might be homeless youth, they might be you know, youth who are indigenous youth who don't have access, or rural and remote youth who don't have access. So how can we, like, do you know what's being done to support those youth who may not have that access to technology to get help in these times?
Well, I know that one thing is often there is a phone, so people are trying to use phones, and but other than that, I don't know. But I know that agencies that work with Indigenous youth who are vulnerable, who don't have access to internet, feel like the youth can access a phone. But it's a really good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Okay. There's another question that is there any phone lines open where kids can call and talk about their feelings? And yes, there is. Do you want to?
Well, there's Kids Help Phone. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't have a whole list of them, but there's a lot.
There's a lot. Kids Help Phone is national. They've increased the number of people. They've increased the access up north so you can connect. So probably the one that's most available across the country is Kids Help Phone.
I think so. And they've got a huge increase in calls, but that's available. And that's available by phone and text. And for teenagers at anybody university, there's what is it called? Time to Talk or Talk to Me. There's also a talk line. So there are many that are available. So it's important to find out what they are and make that available, but I don't know them all.
Okay, jumping around again. Do you have any tips? This is an interest for ensuring safety and privacy when using interpreters in client sessions.
I don't, because I'm not, because now with youth, typically with the youth, they wouldn't need the interpreter. With the parents, that's a really important question. I mean, I know often in working with families years ago, and even more currently, the youth ends up being the interpreter because they can speak English if they've come from, you know, because chances are they learned how to do it more quickly. But I guess, you know, I guess you would do the way we do with other things. I mean, when an interpreter comes into a meeting face to face, we expect them to be confidential. We sign a contract. So if we're going to do it by Zoom, I would assume that we would do the same thing and make sure that we use the interpreters, that we do it through trusted, you know, organizations that we can trust. I mean, we do know organizations, I do know that we get interpreters from them to either interpret the interviews or to translate stuff. So I think just as long as we do it in that same rigorous way and follow all of those procedures, that would be the same.
Yeah, and Suzanne Schulman from the audience has said that Access Alliance does phone interpreting. So there's the.
Oh, so that's great. Yes, and they do
and
great.
Also LGBT Youth
Yes.
Line in Ontario from Joelle does as well.
Yes. Yes.
People have also recommended, I want to just in the chat let people know the Good to Talk post-secondary helpline in Ontario.
That's the one I was thinking of, Good to Talk, yes.
As well as 211 has a great list of the resources as well. So those are 3 places that you could be added if people were looking for more resources.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to, here it says, hi, do you have any specific resources to younger children as they're online more now due to homeschooling?
Any more resources? I don't know off the top of my head, but I know there are. I know there are so many. Trying to think of where, so was that tips for resources or tips for working with them?
The tips for resources specific to young children, I think, just because of their increase online behavior.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, schools must have them, and I would think that children's mental health agencies have them because they would be dealing with that a lot.
There's some great resources. I think MediaSmart has some resources for young children online, as well as the Canadian Psychological Association has some resources for young children online. So you could go there. Go ahead.
The Canadian Association of Child Psychoanalytic Therapists, they would have resources as well.
So there are lots of resources out there. And for older children, someone's recommended the jack.org has good new resources, and they've just recently announced pairing up with Lady Gaga Foundation to have more resources. Mind Your Mind is another resource. But as someone's pointed out, most children's mental health organization has links to resources on their website. So I think that's a really good place to go. Okay, Faye, I have a last big question that you may not know the answer to, but I'm going to put it out there because I think it's a really interesting question to start to think about is, do we know if there's any momentum from a federal perspective to provide affordable data and devices? Access to internet and devices is becoming a basic human right at this point. Do we know what is being done on a national level to address it?
I don't, but I agree it needs to be because it is a basic human right. I don't know, but I think that's a great question, and I think that's something that we should look into. I think that's absolutely critical. And because there's been this misnomer, there's been this myth that The internet has made everybody equal, and people talk about the same with COVID, but if anything, it's done the opposite, really shown us how it's not equal, but it is a basic human right at this point. And I think this might be the opportunity to do it. I mean, now would be a window when people are aware of that, so this might be the time to make sure that start fighting for that.
Yeah, I think it's been a really great impetus. I think, you know, so far the federal government's been focused on the cost of internet and the access into more northern regions, which I think are both really powerful initiatives. But now that COVID's happened, it's challenged us to really ensure that people who are in their homes are not isolated and can reach out and connect with the help that they need. So really important question and issue.
Absolutely. And I really do think now is the time that they would be open to it.
Okay, Faye, I can see what's starting to happen. I'm starting to chit chat with you, which means that it's time to close up the webinar. And I just want to, on behalf of all of us at PREVNet, thank you again. You are just such a fabulous speaker and have provided with so many new insights and thinking about it. And I really like the presentation in terms of thinking about it goes from what is trauma informed to thinking about the challenges to bringing it to solutions. So really highly valuable, and you're getting lots of positives. If you're having a low day, we'll save the chat for you and you can look at the positives that you're getting in the chat. But want to thank you. And I want to just remind everybody to please complete the evaluation. The link has been provided. And also to make sure that you get your certificate as well. And just thank you for taking the time to learn and share with us today, and wishing you all well, and stay healthy, stay safe, and stay at a distance. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.